Okay, we are recording. Okay, good morning, everyone. Today is Wednesday. It is July 29th. We're going to be reading this Shabbos Parshas V'Eschanan, and it is also getting very close to Tisha B'Av. Tonight's going to start the fast of Tisha B'Av, and that means tomorrow is Tisha B'Av. So I would like to, this morning, share some sources with you both on Parshas V'Eschanan, and also some sources that can help hopefully enhance our Tisha B'Av, make it a bit more meaningful. So let me start with the first source here. I've got this source sheet up on the screen in case anyone wasn't able to access it or print it out. This was I saw something this week in the Parsha that made me think of a news item that I had read a couple years ago. This was reported all over, all Jewish sites. I've got it here from Times of Israel. It was on Jerusalem Post. It was everywhere. And basically there was a massive mess up 8 years ago. Rabbinate cancels caterers' kashrus certification after presidential follow-up. What was the story? Priya Aretz company apparently served non-kosher meat at President Perez Independence Day shindig. So Israeli President Perez threw a big Yom Ha'atzmaut shindig in his house. It was a party for excellent soldiers of all religious backgrounds. It was supposed to have been kosher, as every official state event is, and there was a massive scandal. The caterer used treif meat. Let's take a look at the story. So here's the story. It says as follows. The Emek Hefer Regional Council Rabbinate has canceled the kashrus certification of a catering company that apparently served non-kosher meat at last week's Independence Day banquet, hosted by President Shimon Peres. The company failed to attend a special hearing about the incident on Monday morning. The original meat consignment was found to have spoiled. So they originally had ordered kosher meat, but the day of the event, it was spoiled. So the caterer had to rush. And in Israel, on Yom Ha'atzmaut, it's hard to get your hands on a lot of meat because everyone's making barbecues. So what did the caterer do? The caterer bought new supplies from a nearby Arab village, Israeli media said. Initial investigations by the Chief Rabbinate's Kashrus Fraud Unit found that allegations against the Priya Aretz catering company were well-founded. And it did serve meat bought from a non-kosher restaurant at the official celebration event last week, Ma'ariv reported. Meat was apparently bought to replace a large batch of kosher meat that spoiled the day before the banquet. As a result, the company was ordered to face a hearing at the Rabbinate's office on Monday, and its kosher certification was suspended. But company representatives failed to show up for the meeting at the Emek Hefer Rabbinate office, and so officials canceled the kashrus certifications altogether. Without the certifications, the company can no longer claim to provide kosher food services. An affiliated catering company, Shulitz Catering, has been ordered to perform a koshering process on all of its utensils. Investigators are now checking who within the catering company knew about the non-kosher meat. The developments came after Ma'ariv on Sunday reported that a representative from Priya Aretz bought large amounts of meat from a non-kosher shop in Abu Ghosh, an Arab village outside Jerusalem. That's right next to the Jewish community of Telstone. My brother Aaron and his wife Esti and family, they live in Telstone. And Abu Ghosh is the Arab village right next door, very friendly. They're Israeli citizens. And apparently, and by the way, a lot of the chametz in Israel is bought every year by the chametz king of Abu Ghosh. There's an Arab there who's been buying all the chametz for all the rabbanut for years now. So Abu Ghosh, the Arabs there are on a friendly relationship. And here was this guy in a desperation to get meat, to replace the meat that had spoiled. He bought non-kosher meat in Abu Ghosh, an Arab village outside Jerusalem, last Thursday morning, Independence Day. Surveillance videos revealed that the man was a chef from Priya Aretz, the company that later the same day catered the official banquet at the president's residence, attended by the prime minister, the IDF chief of staff, government ministers, 120 outstanding soldiers, and hundreds of others. Perez's spokesman said the findings were very serious and that the president's legal team would consider what action to take against Priya Aretz. I'm not aware of how the case ended up settling, if they took legal action. We do know that it was confirmed that non-kosher meat was served, and this company lost its kosher certification. They probably won't be able to go back into the business of kosher catering. That's a terrible story. You've got here people, regardless of where they were on the spectrum of observance, they were outraged by this because it was an official event. An official state event are all supposed to be kosher, but also many of the people who were invited came with the expectation that They were going to be having a kosher banquet. Many of the soldiers who were invited as outstanding soldiers, this was a prize for them. Many of them were religious, and none of them, many of these people would never have considered eating non-kosher meat. Yet here it was that due to a caterer who was looking to, keep his name and protect their reputation because their meat had gone bad, now all these unsuspecting people had been served non-kosher meat. Also, what that must have trafed up, the koshering that needed to be done in that kitchen and the cutlery. Who knows what kind of mess up this was. But be that as it may, it's a tragic, tragic story. Why did this come to my mind, this parsha, this week when we're going to be learning Parshas Veschanan? Because someone might look at this story and say, what a disaster. What a disaster. This must be the first time in Jewish history that Jewish soldiers serving in an army in Israel were institutionally served, not talking about what one guy does here and there on his own, but here's something that institutionally were served treif. What a terrible, terrible incident. This must have never happened in Jewish history. And I'm here to share with you that that's not the case. I want to share with you something absolutely astonishing that many of you may be unfamiliar with, but there was once not just a small heter, but there was almost a blanket heter, a blanket dispensation for Jewish armies in the land of Israel to eat glatt treif. Now that may come as something of a surprise to you. I want to share with you those sources now. So let's scroll down to page 2. So we're going to read this week in the Parsha. It's in Perek Vav, that's chapter 6. The Pasuk starts with verse 10, Pasuk Yud. So Moshe tells the Jewish people, it'll come one day that God, your Lord, will bring you into the land, Asher nishba lavosecha, that He promised to your ancestors, L'Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, L'seis l'cha arim gedolos, He promised that you will be given great cities, the tovos, they're good cities, Asher lo banisa, and you didn't have to put in the backbreaking labor to build them. In other words, you're coming into a land that many of the cities have already been established for you. Those Canaanim, the natives that have been ejected from the land for their immoral behavior and their idol, they're going to leave behind all sorts of great infrastructure for you to make use of. 11, Yud Aleph, Uvatim Malayim Kol Tuv. You will go into Israel and you will find houses that are fully stocked with all sorts of good things. Asher Lo Milesa, that you didn't have to go through the trouble of filling. It was done for you. Uvaros chatzuvim, and you will find hewn cisterns. Asher lo chatzavta, that you didn't have to go through the back-breaking labor of digging those wells and cisterns. Kramim v'zeisim, you will find vineyards, and you will find groves of olive trees. Asher lo natata, that you did not have to go through all the labor of planting and pruning and all that. V'achalta v'savata, and you can make use of all this. You can eat it and fill yourselves up. 12, Yud Beis, Hishamar Lacha, but please be careful. Pentishkach Hashem, never forget about God. Asher Otziacha Me'eretz Mitzrayim, who took you out of the land of Egypt. Mibeis Avadim, from the house of bondage. Yud Gimel 13, As Hashem Elokecha Tira, you should always be in awe of God. V'osot Havod, and He's the one you should be worshiping. Uvishmo Tishavea, and it's in His name that you should take oaths. Yud Daled 14, Lo seilchun acharei Elohim acherim. Don't follow like what the natives of the land of Israel did. Don't follow after false gods and idols. Me Elohei amim asher seosechem. From all the false gods of the peoples that will surround you. Tesvav, final pasuk here, 15. He kel kana Hashem, because God is a very jealous or zealous God. Lokecha b'kirbecha, and He's in your midst. And yechera af Hashem lokecha bach. And lest the wrath of God strike out against you, and you would be eradicated, you would be wiped off the face of the earth. So Moshe is telling Bnei Yisrael, you're about to go into the land of Israel, and you're going to have things handed to you on a silver platter. You're going to find these cities that have been built for you, infrastructure that's been built for you, wells, cisterns that have been built for you, vineyards, groves of olive trees. All this stuff requires a lot of hard work, yet it's going to be there for you on a silver platter. At the same token, be very careful not to become haughty. Don't ever forget your God. Don't ever forget Hashem. Don't fall into the trap of idol worship that ensnared all of the locals that lived here before you. stay far away from that. Because if you do fall into that trap, God's going to strike out against you. These are the psukim, these 6 psukim that we'll find in V'eschanan. Now I want to share with you a Ramban, Nachmanides, what he does with these psukim. He first tells us the simple reading, and then he tells us a deeper reading based on what the Gemara, the sages teach us in the Talmud, in Maseches Chulin, in the Tractate Chulin. So let's see. What does the Ramban say? It'll be that God brings you into this land, and he says you can have everything good there, and don't ever forget that you owe it all to God, and don't desert him. So Ramban says in his first paragraph, what's going on? He says, God's going to bring you into this land. Yazhir Bekan, Moshe here is warning the Jewish people, Ki berabos hatova, that even though you're going to get this abundance of goodness, Yizkur Yimei Anyo Mrodo, don't ever forget where you came from. Don't get to be living so high on the hog that you're going to forget where you came from and the debt of gratitude that we all have to Hashem. Shaya Eve b'Mitzrayim, we should never forget our humble beginnings, that we started off as slaves in Egypt. Lo yishkach es Hashem, don't ever forget God, she'otzio min avdos, who liberated us, took us out of slavery, out of that slavery, l'tova azos, to all this goodness. Avol yizkor chasadav tamid, we should always remember God's benevolence to us. V'yareyason, we should be in awe of him and fear of him. V'yavod lefanav ke'eved ladonav, and we should serve him the same way a servant serves his master. That servant who serves the master knows that everything he or she has totally depends on the benevolence of that master. That's the way we ought to relate to God. That's his first paragraph. And he says that's the juxtaposition of these psukim, of these verses. Even though you're going to go into a land that is there's so much goodness that's going to be handed to you, don't ever forget where you came from and what the debt of gratitude and appreciation we ought to have to God. Okay, that's the simple reading. And now the Ramban tells us that there is a deeper meaning based on the Gemara, the Talmud, and Chulin. The second paragraph, das Rabosenu, and now by the opinion of our sages in Chulin, Yirmoz Od, there's something much deeper being into that here. Ki atovahu asher yimatzeh babatim. Whatever we find that is good in the houses that are going to be abandoned by the Canaanites, Hamalayim, everything that's been filled up in their storehouses, mutter, we are allowed to make use of. Afilu hayusham dvarim anesarim b'Torah. Even if we were to find stuff on their shelves in their fridge, foods which the Torah clearly prohibits. Kigon kadle de chazire. Even if it was some kind of preserved pig meat, that could be bacon, that could be some kind of salted stuff, that could be stuff in a brine. Whatever we find the nastiest jerky that's there, even though this stuff is glat treif, there's a special dispensation that is given to us in this pasuk, that when we go into the land of Israel and we are conquering the land, we are allowed to make use of whatever we find. Okramim netuim kolayim, even if you were to find vineyards that violated the Torah's principle of mixing them with other produce. In other words, the Torah has very strict laws when it comes to vineyards, how far away other fruit products and other grains need to be planted from them. Let's say the Canaanites did not have those rules, so they violated them. Can I still make use of those vineyards that grew with other species so close by? I can eat them. I can't plant something like that, but I can make use. I can pick the grapes of what the Canaanites left behind. Or orla, that's the fruit from the first 3 years of a tree's life. Let's say we find an abandoned grove of orange trees that the Canaanites had planted, and they left a sign there that says these were planted just 2 years ago, and there's beautiful oranges there. I could eat those oranges, even though if I were to plant an orange tree, I got to wait, let 3 years pass, and now eat it in the 4th year. Afilu bibaros, and even in the cisterns that I find, yitakein shaya bechatzivasan davar asur b'tiach asher bahen. Maybe they used some non-kosher ingredients when they were lining to make it waterproof. Maybe they wanted to grease it up, so they used some kind of lard. They used some pig schmaltz in the lining of those cisterns. So one might say, I can't drink anything out of those cisterns. So the Torah here in this pasuk is telling us, yes, you can. He says, oh, hiskir aboros, or maybe it's mentioning the cisterns for a different reason. Derech malitza, it's like it's an example. It's almost like a mashal, or it's hyperbole. Lazkir riboya tova, saying just like cisterns are like water is just overflowing with goodness, that's what it's telling us, is that when we go into this land, we'll find it overflowing with goodness. And God in this pasuk, in these psukim, in these verses, is offering dispensation to Jewish forces that they are allowed to make use out of anything in food objects, anything that they would find there. Let's just, before we see the third paragraph of Ramban, let's just read this back into the verses. And you'll see that this makes a lot of sense in the verses. You're going to need a lot of sense to understand the concept, but let's see the verses. Again, go back to verse 10. Yud, it'll be when God takes you into the land, that land that he promised your ancestors. You're going to get there, these big cities, pre-existing infrastructure. It's going to all be there for you. Yud Aleph, 11. You're also going to find these houses that are filled up with all sorts of goods. They're stacked to the top. They got all the stuff from Corky's. They got everything in there that's not kosher. Asher lo milesa, you didn't fill it up. The Canaanites did. Ubaros chatzuvim, and you're going to find these already dug cisterns. Asher lo chatzavta, you didn't have to go through the backbreaking effort of digging them. Kramim v'zeisim, and you're going to find all these vineyards, and you'll find groves of olive trees. Asher lo natata, that you never planted. And what are we told? The achalta v'savata. You're allowed to enjoy it and fill yourself up. So there's some special dispensation that's given here. It's mind-boggling, but we're going to have to understand it. We'll get there in a second. But what we're being told, and the Ramban is saying, he's telling us, remember what the sages taught us in Chulin, is that when Jewish forces would enter the land, anything that they find there, even if it would be as glat treif, as preserved pig meat, salted pig meat, enjoy it. It's yours to enjoy. We'll soon see for how long. Last third paragraph. In these psukim, what we're being told is that God offered dispensation to allow Jewish armies to eat everything that is normally asur, normally forbidden. Zulasi isur avodah zarah. The one thing that they cannot partake of is anything that is prohibited because of idol worship. We're going to see this later. Is that when we find golden and silver idols, we have to destroy them. We shouldn't say, wow, I want that gold and silver, let me keep them. We have to destroy that. And that's why you'll see a little bit later, it says, we have to destroy any of the idol worshipping altars we find. That we have to destroy any vestige of idol worship or anything that's served in that capacity. But what we're being told in these psukim is that anything else we find, any ma'achalos asuros, any type of forbidden foods, enjoy. You can have it. How long did this dispensation last for? Until they finished. The first opinion of the Ramban is as long as it takes to finish it up. You found a warehouse, you found Corky's warehouse where he's got all their stuff that they were planning to ship. Until you finish it, knock yourself out. But there's another opinion in the Talmud that says, no, it wasn't that long. It was rather b'sheva shekavshu. During the 7 years that the Jews were involved in conquering and fighting the natives, it was only limited to those 7 years. And that's the Ramban says that's the way it really seems to me from the Gemara, the Perek Rishon Maseches Chulin. When you look this up, it looks like from the Gemara that is the correct halacha there. It wasn't an unlimited dispensation. If they would have found this never-ending warehouse of Corky's or some other treif stuff, they wouldn't have been allowed to eat that until they finish it. They've got a 7-year span of while they're involved in conquering the land. There's dispensation that they are allowed to eat whatever it is that they come upon. Now the question is why? Why is this? And I saw that there's a dispute here between the Ramban Nachmanides and Rambam Maimonides. And Maimonides makes it clear that he was not as I would say permissive as Ramban, as Nachmanides seems to be here. Again, they both have their sources. Rambam Maimonides seems to limit it that it's just during combat. And the theory was that during combat, it's not like today where they got, Jewish soldiers have canned foods that the quartermaster supplies them with. It was pretty much you had to forage for yourself. The frontline troops would go out, they had limited supplies, and then you had to forage for yourself. if you're going to tell soldiers that here, you're at war, the enemy is looking to ambush you anywhere, and you can't eat the food that you found because you got to go out and find kosher. That means now you got to leave your safety and go marauding around looking for a sheep to shecht, so now you can barbecue it, when you got a whole storage area here filled with beef jerky, non-kosher beef jerky, or Corky's product. So Rambam says it was almost like pikuach nefesh. Since this was in a case of active war going on, this was a dispensation for pikuach nefesh, that soldiers would not have to leave the safety of wherever they were to go forage to find kosher food. That seems to be the way Rambam Maimonides learns this. Ramban probably buys into that, but again, he doesn't limit it to just being in a state of war. He says this was true for the whole 7 years that they were fighting. So that would mean even if there was relative calm all around, and they had confirmed that there was no enemy within 20 miles, they could still eat the Corky's because it's within the 7 years. So it looks like Rambam would have been more restrictive. Maimonides would have been more restrictive and said only if there's active fear that leaving the foxhole to go find a sheep is going to get yourself shot, then Rambam would say that's when this heter kicks in. But according to Ramban, according to Nachmanides, that entire 7 years that the fighting was going on, that's when this dispensation existed. And he's got proofs from the Gemara about that. So I'm just pointing this out. The theory seems to be that even the Ramban buys into is that forcing the Jewish troops to go forage and look for kosher food could put lives at risk. So he was able to say, okay, I'll live with that during the whole 7 years, because the 7 years is during active war. That's how long this heter, this dispensation, lasts for. Rambam seems to have been more restrictive on that, but that seems to be the basic idea here. So I don't know if everyone's aware of this, but this is just an absolutely wild concept that if anyone would ever ask you, was there ever a time where Jewish armies, we're not talking about, we all know for pikuach nefesh, to save a life, if someone was marooned on a desert island, you have a Jewish Robinson Crusoe, you have some guy that was deserted on a desert island, and the only thing to eat there is non-kosher food. All the fish in the lakes there on the island that are non-kosher fish, and all the meat that's running around is boar and non-kosher food. And of course, the Torah's dictate is that we have to live, we have to stay alive. There's only 3 things we give up our life for, and that's idol worship, murder, and the forbidden sexual relationships in the Torah. But aside from that, we would violate anything in order to be able to survive. So we know that in exceptional cases like that, then it would be okay to eat treif. But if anyone was to ask you, was there ever a time in Israel, where there was access to kosher food, where not one, but an entire huge group of Jews had dispensation to eat glatt treif? The answer is yes. During the 7 years, everyone would agree, well, during combat, but according to the Ramban, during the 7 years, because again, how he understands the Gemara in Chulin, during the 7 years that the Jewish forces were involved conquering the land of Israel and subduing their enemies, during that time, they were given full license to eat and to enjoy whatever forbidden foods they chanced upon in the land of Israel. So as terrible as this incident was, the Yom Ha'atzmaut party at Perez's house, and there's no way to come up with a heter for that, someone should know, we should all know, that's not the first time that Jewish soldiers ate non-kosher food. The difference is, when they ate it in the time of Yehoshua, they were allowed to do so, as the Torah clearly says here, and that's what the Ramban's alluding to. But it doesn't tell us about it. That doesn't mean that it would be okay. It was okay for those soldiers at that Yom Ha'atzmaut party, and the caterer who caused this is going to have a real din v'cheshbon. He's going to have a real account to pay with God. Layla's
Question,
yes,
Rabbi.
Yes.
Just to clarify, in a war, even today, that the IDF finds itself fighting not on Israeli soil, say like the war in Lebanon, that would have been permissible for them to eat non-kosher if had nothing else.
Any time if someone's in a situation of pikuach nefesh that they need to eat, and they could really, they got to be at the top of their game, and if they don't, they're gonna just not have the strength to go on and fight. That's regular pikuach nefesh. That would be a case, again, someone deserted on an island that would be allowed to eat non-kosher food. But so again, if soldiers were out and supplies can't reach them, something like that, 100%, that's standard pikuach nefesh. Here, what this is telling us is a wild dispensation that for 7 years, even if there was possible to get them kosher food, nonetheless, there was a heter that existed to eat the non-kosher food that was readily available. So this was a wild point in Jewish history. Layla was asking me before, was this limited to soldiers or was it for all Jews? I think this would come down to the dispute between the Ramban and Rambam. Maimonides limits this just to soldiers in cases of combat where leaving the foxhole could get themselves killed. But let's say the war is already going on 40 miles away. We've already conquered this area. It's already subdued. And now the locals here just want to have the corkies. And it's the women and children and the non-combatants. They want to, the Jewish fellows, they want to have the corkies. Could they do it? It sounds like from the Ramban, as long as it was during those first 7 years, that's what the pasuk is giving license to. Again, it could be a Gzeres HaKasuv. It's just a chok. It's something we don't know the answer for. Rambam limited this very, very severely. Rambam, Maimonides limited this just to soldiers, just in a situation where leaving the foxhole to go forage for kosher food could get themselves killed. But it seems like the Ramban, Nachmanides, his understanding of the Gemara and Chulin has it as a much more expansive. I think the reason why we don't really see how this plays itself out lahalacha is because it never will play itself out lahalacha. This was limited to those 7 years. This was an allowance that was limited to those 7 years when Yoshua brought the Jews into the land of Israel. So that's probably why it's hard to find so much being written on this. This isn't something that's applicable for us nowadays. Nowadays, what's applicable for us is the case that Abby mentioned. Anyone who finds themselves in a case of pikuach nefesh, in a case where they have to, in order to survive, have to eat non-kosher food. These were the cases of many. You look at many of the wars where you had refugees and the liberators gave them food. It's not their job to ask if it's kosher. They have to survive. They have to eat what the liberators gave them. That's when they're healthy enough and they could find themselves kosher food. That's a different situation. But
Rabbi?
Yes, ma'am.
Well, one other point. It makes sense that when the Bnei Yisrael go into the land and then they right away have to conquer, and the men are presumably not with their family units, but they're out conquering the land. So would women be able to? I mean, I guess they would,
yeah,
but it would
that's
be
what
hard to
I
feed
just said,
their
Layla.
families without.
Correct. That's what Layla was just asking. What we were talking about is that this probably come down to the dispute between Rambam and the Ramban. Is that Rambam, Maimonides, made it sound as if this was just limited to soldiers in combat that leaving the foxhole might get themselves killed. But according to Ramban, this was much more expansive for the whole 7 years. And I think it would apply to the women and kids because, again, if the men, as you said, were off in combat.
It makes sense.
Yeah, who's planting, who's raising everything like that. So it's basically for those 7 years where life is not normal, there's this massive military campaign going on. During those 7 years, there's a heter, there was dispensation that they could all eat non-kosher food. So that, I agree with you. I think that would make a lot of sense. I think that's what both you and Layla were getting at. But I think only the Ramban, Nachmanides, is going to say that. Rambam, Maimonides, he limits this just to the soldiers in situations where leaving the foxhole might get themselves shot. So that's it. But this is absolutely fascinating. I don't know. This isn't something we think of. We think of, okay, the Torah was given, told us that chazir, telling us that pork is absolutely off limits. That's you can't imagine a place where that wasn't the case, and here we're told it was. My question would be, okay, now 7 years are up. They all used their pots and pans for this. I'm assuming they all had to kasher it. Just because it was okay during that dispensation doesn't mean that the pots and pans that were used for the chazer, now don't have to be kashered. I would assume they all needed to kasher their stuff and or buy new stuff if it couldn't be kashered. That's what I would assume. Now, I want to share with you two more sources on this before we go to Tisha B'Av. So we just explained, I'm going to scroll back up. We looked at 6 psukim, 6 verses. So the first 2 made perfect sense according to this Ramban. The first 2 are telling us that, you're going to go into the land of Israel and you're going to have, God's going to give you a great gift. You'll have this dispensation that you'll be able to enjoy all the food that you find there. The storehouse says, while you're busy fighting these wars, you won't have to worry about planting and gathering, and all that. But what about the last 4 psukim? All of a sudden, the next 4 psukim say, look at Yud Beis 12, Yishamar L'cha. Be very careful not to forget God. 13, always be in awe of God and take oaths in his name. 14, don't follow after idols. And 15, if you do, God's going to strike back. What's the juxtaposition? We've just been given a heter, a dispensation, to eat non-kosher food. What's going on now that we need these next psukim saying, be very careful, don't fall off the wagon, and don't forget about God. So let's look at, on page 3, the Meshech Chachma. This is Rav Simcha Cohen of Dvinsk. So again, he's in the early 20th century. So here's what he writes, and we'll see something very, very similar from the Netziv as well. So look what the Meshech Chachma does. He does something beautiful. He says this makes perfect sense, the juxtaposition. It says, Ubatim layim choltuv. So he says you're going to find houses that are stocked with everything good. Afilu kidli de chaziri hutar b'zayin shekivshu. And he quotes the Gemara in Chulin that the Ramban quoted, that even preserved pig meat is mutter, is permissible for Jews during the 7 years that they were conquering the land. Therefore, Masik, the pasuk has to continue and say, Hishamar lecha, be very careful, be on the lookout. You have this heter to eat pork, but it's not going to be a freebie in a sense. Hiteva dvarim ha'asurim, the very nature of foods that are prohibited, meaning non-kosher foods, shemetamtemes alev, they block up our heart. This is called spiritual cholesterol. There's something called timtum alev that we believe that the Chazal tell us that if we consume non-kosher food, there's a risk involved of creating a blockage to make it that, I don't understand this, it's spiritual, that whatever Torah and mitzvahs we're going to do, there will be some kind of blockage effect, that prevents it from having the full profound effect on us, which it should. So you can have someone who's going to minyan 3 times a day, they're engaged in Torah study, but they're eating treif, the Torah is not going to have an effect on them that it should, because that treif creates that spiritual blockage there. So the Meshech Chachma is saying, this is exactly why those next psukim are coming, to tell us that, yes, we have dispensation to eat this food because of the fact we're busy with war, or it's pikuach nefesh, we can't plant, whatever it is, but be on the lookout, because we're going to still have to deal with the effects of timtum alev, k'moshe kasov, the nitamtem bam. When it talks about a non-kosher food, it says that non-kosher food has this ability to cause a spiritual blockage. Even though they're eating it with dispensation, you can't change the fact this is the spiritual component of that food. Kosher food does not create spiritual cholesterol, but non-kosher food does. Think about this for a second. Let's say someone is on a very, very strict diet that they cannot eat fatty foods. And for some reason, their wife makes for them, because it's our anniversary, I'll make you a really fatty steak. I'll say it's okay today. Great. My wife says it's okay. It made me a really fatty steak. Does that mean I don't have to deal with the cholesterol? It's reality. That's part of the nature of the fatty steak. There's cholesterol. I'm going to have to deal with that. So same thing here. God's giving permission that you could eat. There's dispensation, halachic dispensation. You could eat non-kosher food during this time. But that doesn't change the very nature of it. It still is non-kosher food. Just right now, you could eat it. That means that this negative aspect of it could still have bad repercussions on us. And he says that abbreviation, Viduk, that means always Vidaik, Vidimtzakal, think about this a little bit, it'll make sense to you. L'chein, it goes based on this concept. Yechalel Shabbos l'chola, the halacha is, let's say there's a chola, there's a Jewish person who's sick, and the doctor says that person is missing iron, protein, whatever it is, needs fresh meat now. So what do? We are mechalel Shabbos to go ahead and properly slaughter a kosher animal and provide him with kosher meat. Even though I could have just gone to Kroger or my next door neighbor has, a leg of lamb in the freezer that was nevela, was not slaughtered properly, but it wasn't kosher. Why should I be mechalel Shabbos to provide this person with kosher food? I could just get, if the person needs iron, needs protein, whatever it is, I'll just go to my neighbor and I'll get, Mindy's great, she's right next door. I'll just ask her if she's got any non-kosher meat in the house. She's got dogs. I'm sure she's got some meat there. So I'll say, we'll cook this. We'll give this to the challah. The halacha says, no, don't do that. Why? Because very nice, I'll be giving this person meat. But now I'm giving this challah timtum alev. I'm giving this person that spiritual cholesterol, that spiritual blockage that can have some negative effects on the person. Therefore, if the doctor says this person needs meat, needs iron, and I don't have any in the house, I shecht an animal. I'm a Chal Shabbos. That's what I'll do in order to get that person kosher food, because even though the person had a dispensation, it doesn't matter. We want to get the person kosher. The Chassam Sofer famously wrote about this in the 1800s. Someone wrote to him that they had a child nebuch who needed to be institutionalized. It was some sort of mental institution, that there was no place that could provide a kosher food. So they were going to send this child to a non-kosher institution because that was the only place that was available. And they asked the Chassam Sofer, look, the person is a chola, is that okay? And the Chassam Sofer said, al pi din, according to the law, 100%. This is what you need to do. But try your hardest. See if there's any way you can still get the person kosher food. Why? Because there still is the issue of timtum alev. Put that person in institution. They need to be institutionalized. Go for it. But try, see if there's any way you can still get some kosher food in there. That was what he said. Now, again, that might not always be the case. Not every institution will allow outside food in there, and then you've got to do what's going to keep the person alive. But the Chassam Sofer was writing to the person saying, if it's possible, even though the person's not chayiv in mitzvahs, is a chola, or she's a chola, whoever it was, nonetheless, there's timtum alev, so try to get the person kosher food. So look what the Meshech Chachma is doing here. The Meshech Chachma is saying, yes, those soldiers or their wives and kids, they've got a heter to eat korkis. It's there for the 7 years they're fighting. But hishamer lecha, be on the lookout. Double down on whatever spiritual efforts need to be made. Daven 3 times as much as you normally do. Learn even harder. Be cognizant of the fact you're eating treif. And that with that comes timtum alev. So now you got to be on the lookout not to forget Hashem, because the very nature of eating treif could do that. That's how he's learning these psukim. So even though there could have been a time during those 7 years where it was okay, this really gives you pause, and it makes it sound like what the pasuk is saying, even though it was okay, might not be the best idea. So yeah, if it's a real desperate straits, it might make sense to go for it. But then you got to double down on your spirituality to make sure this doesn't affect you adversely. So it could very well be, in a sense, this is tempering this, because it's saying even though technically the stuff was mutter, it comes with a serious risk. So be very careful about using that dispensation. And you'll see the Netziv says almost the same thing in the next paragraph. The Netziv, in his commentary to the Chumash, says the same thing. In Parshas, he says you got to look at this. Tzarech bir, it requires explanation. What's going on in these next couple psukim? What's going on? We're told that you're going to go into this land and you're going to find all this great stuff, and then don't forget God. What's being added? What's happening here? So he says, Me'ata ba Parshas. So what's going on in this set of psukim? It's telling you that during the time of war, Jewish soldiers were allowed to eat non-kosher food. And now the Torah feels the need to warn you, even though you have that heter to eat non-kosher food, be very, very careful. Why does the Torah give us this warning? Because there's nothing that has the potential to cause problems for a Jew than eating non-kosher food. The very nature, the spiritual nature of non-kosher food, blocks up. It has that spiritual cholesterol, and it makes us less receptive to Torah and to God. Kirisa b'sof perak gimel and Yoma, like it says in the Gemara in Yoma, anything that's non-kosher has that ability to give us that spiritual cholesterol. Mazik la'nefesh damages our spirit. Upeguma yoser mishari averos, and does more damage to us than other averos. Really something to think about. And I've heard this from several years ago. There was a terrible kashrut scandal that took place in Muncie, New York, where a butcher was found to have been serving non-kosher chickens. I'm sure it didn't start off that way. Probably was over a chain of events that, one thing led to the next. The guy saved a little money here and there. Next thing you knew, he was serving non-kosher. He was selling non-kosher chickens in this place. Massive kashrut scandal, and many people had to kasher their homes. This was a real mess. And I remember reading afterwards that there was an elderly Holocaust survivor who had lived in Muncie at the time, who was just in absolute tears. And he said, I survived the whole period of the camps. I was careful not to eat real treif. I ate bread, I ate whatever I could, but I didn't eat full-fledged treif, even though they would give us some stuff, whether it was in labor camps, whatever it was. I did not eat full-blown treif food. And now here I am, comfortable in America, and this is where I end up eating treif. The guy was absolutely heartbroken. And this is the understanding that we've always had, is that, yes, of all the ways we can affect ourselves adversely through ma'achalos asuros, through non-kosher food, that has the ability to cause terrible damage. And look at those words of the mitzvah that he ended with. He says, mazik la'nefesh upaguma, it damages our spirit and it causes harm, yoser mishare averos, more than other averos. So it's really something to think about. I want to conclude this by telling you something, a remark I heard from Rabbi Shmuel Kamenetsky. This is probably about 15 years ago. I can't remember the exact date, but I went to an AJOP. AJOP stands for Association of Jewish Outreach Professionals. I went to an AJOP conference with a couple of friends. It was like one of my last years in yeshiva. And I went to this AJOP conference, and I think it was a 2-day conference. And it was very, very interesting. We were listening to a lot of people. We were considering, joining up with an outreach organization when we left yeshiva. So we wanted to go to get a better understanding of what was going on. And I don't remember if this was just standing around a group or if this was a presentation that Rabbi Shmuel Kamenetsky made, because I definitely remember he spoke there. But I also remember there were times where, there were groups of people standing around him asking him questions. I don't remember what the nature was, if it was a public address or a group. But someone asked him the following question. He was saying, this guy runs a Jewish outreach program. And he was saying that every year they would do a Shabbaton, like a long weekend Shabbaton. And they would run all sorts of courses, and they really geared it to getting non-observant Jews there to spend a Shabbos together. But it was really expensive. It cost them a lot of money in terms of raising the funds to make that program happen. And he says, but we also have done programs that are not over the course of a Shabbos. It's just, a couple day series. It could be, during the week or on a Sunday. He says, and it costs a lot less money. And, if you crunch the numbers and see how many people coming, we get close to the same number of people. Is it kedai? Is it worth it to put ourselves out raising all that money, to make that weekend program when we could probably find a way to get just as many people through the door on a weekday and that way? And I was fascinated by his answer. He goes, I've heard from outreach professionals around the world and throughout Israel especially, but here in America I've heard it too, that there is nothing more effective than coming to those hotels and spending an entire Shabbos together. And I don't know why. I don't know if it's the power of Shabbos, the fact that they, are all coming together and spending Shabbos together, or if it's the fact you got them on a Friday morning and you're hanging out to them until a Sunday afternoon. And in that closed context, you provided them with kosher food that whole time. They didn't eat any treif from Friday morning. You had them in that hotel. You didn't have those non-observant Jews eating treif from Friday morning until, let's say, Sunday afternoon. Maybe the fact that they were eating kosher that whole time and there was no timtum halev, they weren't coming in there and eating treif, maybe that made them more receptive to the whole power of Shabbos or to hearing the Torah that was being taught. We don't know. I don't know how this works. But he was saying, if at all possible, I really encourage you to keep trying to do those long weekend Shabbaton programs at the hotel. I thought that was just absolutely fascinating to hear that, to hear this conversation and to hear that advice. And here he was saying that we don't know why those are as effective as they are. Maybe what makes them so effective is just pulling people away from treif food for that long of a period of time. Maybe that's what makes it as effective as it was. I thought that was just absolutely fascinating. Okay, I want to share, since Tisha B'Av is tomorrow, I want to share with you something that I saw a couple of years ago on Tisha B'Av. It completely changed the way I view a couple things, and it really, I found it enlightening and enriching, and I want to share it with you. On Tisha B'Av, there's a period in the day where we lessen some of our morning practices, and that's after Chatzos, after midday, tomorrow on Thursday. After midday, we're going to lessen some of our morning. So, for example, we're able to sit on a regular chair. You don't have to sit on one of those stools close to the ground. By the way, again, if anyone has a back or legs or hips that's hurting them or in poor health, you don't have to sit on a stool or on the ground or low to the ground at all. You can sit in a regular chair. But assuming someone is not having back, hip, or leg problems, then we try on Tisha B'Av to sit from the night when the fast begins until Chatzos, until midday, which is going to be 1:05 tomorrow afternoon. We try to sit as low to the ground as possible, if that's in a little chair, a stool, on the ground, on a pillow, whatever it may be. So comes Chatzos, we don't have to do that anymore. Another thing is that at start of Tisha B'Av, we do something to jar us and to say that we're mourning the loss of the Beis HaMikdash. Most shuls have a beautiful parochas, have a beautiful a cover, or a curtain rather, a curtain hanging over the Aron Kodesh, the Ark in the Shul. So we usually move that off to the side to say that we can't enjoy the full splendor of this while we're mourning the loss of the Beis HaMikdash. But once Chatzos comes, once it's midday, we put the curtain back. Also, men don't wear their talis and tefillin in the morning at Shachris on Tisha B'Av. Why? Because they're described as pe'er and adornment, and it's just incongruous to wear pe'er and to dress ourselves up in something beautiful and fancy like talis and tefillin when we're in such deep sense of mourning. But comes Chatzos, the mourning lessens. Now, what's so hard to understand about that is that according to the Gemara, you know when the Beis HaMikdash was actually burning the strongest? After Chatzos. The Romans started destroying the Beis HaMikdash earlier on Tisha B'Av, but you know when it was actually in its full zenith of flames and when it was totally consumed by flames? Starting at Chatzos. So isn't that a little weird that at Chatzos is when we start to lessen our mourning practices, but it's precisely at Chatzos when the Beis HaMikdash was being destroyed in its biggest sense? Question number one. Question number two. So I saw this from Rav Soloveitchik. Rav Soloveitchik, Zichrono Livracha, was very famous for his marathon Tisha B'Av Kinos sessions. He would, I don't want to say he was the first, he may have been one of the first to really spend a lot of time learning, teaching, and explaining the Kinos. I've heard from some of his Talmidim who would be with him in Boston in the summers. They would say that basically they would daven Shachris, they would sit down on their low chairs after Shachris, and he would teach Kinnis for until Mincha. He would go all day going through Kinnis, different Kinnis each year, depending on where he got up to in the previous year. And sometimes he would say, okay, I have a new understanding of this Kinna, I want to explain it. And he basically would darshan on the Kinnis for hours and hours on end. They said it was just a marathon. He would go until Mincha, and they said it was just the most mind-blowing experience. A number of his lessons have been recorded in print over the years. I have a book, it's on my shelf, I'm looking at it right now. It's called The Lord is Righteous in All His Ways. Rabbi J.J. Schachter, who was here a couple years ago when we had our shul dinner, so Rabbi J.J. Schachter, he collected tapes from those periods and he tried to transcribe them as closely as he could. And then also a couple of years ago, the OU, together with Koren, they put out a new Tisha B'Av Siddur that has in it Eicha, it has Kinos, and it has a lot of notes in there. Again, also from Rabbi Soloveitchik's Kina Drushos, these marathon lectures that he would give on Kinos on Tisha B'Av. And I saw this idea, this question, and the idea I'm going to share with you in both of those books. Here's the second question. So question number one that he had is that isn't this a little odd that when Tisha B'Av, when the Beis HaMikdash is burning the greatest, that's when our mourning lessens? And also let's take a look at Kina 19. This is a Kina that we say every year. There's a lot of kinnos that are, some people say some, not all. This is one that I always make sure to say every year, and we'll be saying selected kinnos tomorrow. This will be in there as well. It's Kina Yud Tes 19, and this Kina it's basically contrasts. We point out how good Hashem was to us and how nasty we were in return, how we did not show our appreciation. So let's look at a couple examples. It says, L'cha Hashem Atzdaka. So I got it here both the Hebrew and the English. L'cha Hashem Atzdaka b'sichon v'og v'chol malchei Canaan. So on the bottom I got there, yours, my Lord, is righteousness because of how you waged war for us against Sichon, Og, and all the kings of Canaan. And then we contrast it. V'lanu boshes apanim. But we're terribly ashamed. V'achan asher ma'al b'cheran b'li mitzo ma'an. Because there was this character called Achan, who in the first battle in Israel was against Yericho. He went and he took from the forbidden spoils. We weren't supposed to take any of the loot from Yericho, and he took from it. We're very embarrassed about that. There was no excuse for what he did. A little bit later, L'cha Hashem Atzdaka. Lord, you've got all the righteousness. Bekima Shiloh, you built the Mishkan at Shiloh, where it stood for 369 years. V'Nov, v'Givon, and then the next two places where the Mishkan stood was in Nov and then Givon. I think there was about 50 some odd years between them. Ubeis Olamim, and then you allowed the Beis HaMikdash to be built. That was awesome. V'lanu boshes apanim, but we're terribly ashamed. Beresh hashenim sabanu shecharvu bam anu nichlamim. We're terribly embarrassed because we had all sorts of wicked deeds, and those wicked deeds caused all those structures to be destroyed. The Mishkan at Shiloh was destroyed, and then the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. These are all things that we're terribly ashamed of. Third one, and this is the one that should just startle us, and I never noticed it until I saw Rav Soloveitchik point this out. L'cha Hashem atzdaka. God, you know why you're so righteous? B'shnei chorbanos shecharvu b'vitzenu v'anu kaimim. Because of the two destructions, you destroyed both Beis Hamikdashes that were destroyed because of our corruption, but we were spared. So you're great for that. V'lanu boshas hapanim. But you know why we're so terribly ashamed? B'shuvenu elecha b'chol lev shetashuv aleinu b'rachamim. Because we should have repented wholeheartedly to you, and we never did. So this is a little bit odd. The structure of this kinna is we say in the first sentence, everything God did to us, which is so awesome, and how we've been terrible. But look at this sentence. You know why, Hashem, you're so great? Because you destroyed the Beis Hamikdash twice and allowed us to survive. That's not totally good. In other words, again, the structure of all these kinnas are, the first sentence is something completely good that Hashem did, and then something we did that's so rotten. In this first sentence, what are we saying? Hashem, you're so great. You destroyed the Beis Hamikdash twice, and you allowed us to survive. But we're so nasty because of this. Why are we harping on Hashem, you're so great because you destroyed the Beis Hamikdash twice? Just say, Hashem, you're so great because we're still here. We're saying, Hashem, you're so great, you destroyed the Beis Hamikdash twice. That just doesn't seem with the pattern of just focusing on something that's totally good. So Rav Soloveitchik raises these 2 points. Again, question number 1, why after Chatzos, midday on Tisha B'Av, does our morning start to lessen? And number 2, why are we saying, Hashem, you're so great, you destroyed the Beis Hamikdash twice? Well, what is that? So he says, in order to explain this, we have to look at a medrash. There's a beautiful medrash in Eicha. This is on the last page, or page 4. The medrash says as follows. There's a famous paragraph of Tehillim, Ayin Tes, that would be 79 in Tehillim. It says, Mizmor la'asaf. It says, I got to hear both in the Hebrew and the English. We'll read it. Mizmor la'asaf. It says, Mizmor la'asaf, a song or a psalm to Asaf. Elokim bo goyim benachlasecha. Oh God, the heathens have come into your inheritance, meaning into the Beis Hamikdash. This is a paragraph in Tehillim that's written about the goyim destroying the Beis Hamikdash. So the Medrash asks, it shouldn't have been titled Mizmor. Mizmor means a song. This is a song for Asaf. It should have said Bechil Asaf. This was the cry of Asaf, talking about the goyim destroying the Beis Hamikdash. Nihila Asaf. It should have been the lament of Asaf. Kina Asaf, or the dirge of Asaf. That's what it should have been. Ma'u Amar Mizmar Asaf. Why on earth is the Tehillim calling it the song, the psalm of Asaf? Ela Mashal, we've got a parable here that needs to be shared. L'melach shasa beis chuppah livno. There was a king who built the most beautiful bridal chamber, some kind of party house for his favorite son, who was his prince. And then what happened? Visida, Vikida, Vitsira. He did everything he could to decorate it. He plastered it. He cemented it. He decorated it. He made it beautiful. He was building like this great luxury home for his beloved prince. V'yatza b'no l'tarbus rav. And what did the prince do? The prince then went down the wrong path in life. He went off he went off the derech, you could say. He went off the, he's doing everything wrong, everything to embarrass his father, the king. So what did the father do? The father went to that bridal, that I guess this honeymoon suite that he built for his son, and he destroys the place. The first thing he does is he tears up the curtains. And then what does he do? And then he shatters all the rods, all the decorations, everything in there. He goes in there on a rampage. You can just picture him with a baseball bat, smashing the place to shreds. And then the tutor, isn't that interesting? The word is pedagogue. This is obviously it's not a Hebrew word. This is probably a Latin word that found its way into the Medrash. Like pedagogy means teaching techniques. So this means the tutor. Then the son's favorite teacher enters in there. The son's tutor goes in there, and he finds ibub shel kanim v'yimizamer. He finds a piece of rod. He finds some broken rods, and he makes a musical instrument out of it. And he starts playing music out of these broken rods. Amar lahem. I'm sorry, Amru lo. So then they say to him, his friends say to him, Hamelach hafach chuppah soshal b'no. The king just destroyed the chuppah. He hates his son because the path the son's gone down in life, and just destroyed what he built for him. And now you're sitting there, you took one of the broken pieces and made it into a flute? That's bizarre. What's wrong with you? Amar lahem. So the tutor, the teacher says back, he says, Mizamer ani. You know why I'm singing? Shehafach hupaso shel beno v'lo shafach hamasol beno. I'm singing out of praise, saying, thank God. That king was so mad at his son. He should have had his son's head. He should have scalped him. He should have just totally brought him to the firing squad because of all the things the son's done wrong. But what did the father do? He took out his wrath on this bridal on this honeymoon suite that he built for him. That's why I'm so happy. He didn't pour out his wrath on his kid. Same thing. This is going on when Asaf composed this paragraph of Tehillim about the destruction of Beis HaMikdash. God just destroyed the Beis HaMikdash. And you're making a zemer about this? We're singing a song. Yeah, the Goyim have come to the Beis HaMikdash to destroy it. What are you singing a song about? Amar Lahem, Asaf says, I'll tell you why I'm singing. I'm praising God that he was so mad with the Jewish people. What did he do? He poured out his wrath on sticks and stones, on the Beis HaMikdash, on the physical structure. And he didn't pour out his full fury on the Jewish people. Now, the Jewish people suffered terribly during the Churban Beis HaMikdash and in all the years since then. But we weren't ultimately destroyed. Hashem had a choice. What am I going to do to pour out my wrath in dancing in fullness? Am I going to pour it out on the Jewish people and totally eradicate them? Or am I going to take it out on a building of sticks and stones? And Asaf says, that's why I'm singing. Look what God chose to do. That's why it says, that explains the pasuk that says that God kindled, this is I believe this is in Eicha, is that God kindled the fire in Zion and it tore up and it devoured the foundations of it. So this is what the Medrash says. So Rav Soloveitchik says, this is how we answer the two questions. You know what's going on at Chatzos? At Chatzos, that was when the Beis HaMikdash was in its full Churban. That's when the fire seized it the most. Until that point, we didn't know, how's it going to go? We knew this day is coming. We knew that God at some point is going to be so fed up with all the shenanigans and all the terrible things that Klal Yisrael has done that he's going to pour out his wrath on us. But we don't know how it's going to go. Is he going to ultimately destroy us? And then what did we see? He decided to take it out on the Beis HaMikdash. He poured out his wrath like that angry king who, instead of shechting the son, took it out on the honeymoon suite he built for him. That's what Hashem did to the Beis HaMikdash. So precisely at Chatzos, on Tisha B'Av, when the Beis HaMikdash was most consumed in flames, that's when we start to relax some of our mourning, because we said we can breathe a little bit of a sigh of relief. We suffered horribly during the Churban. Bnei Yisrael were slaughtered, but as a people, as an entire unit, they weren't eradicated. And they could say, wow, Hashem's taking it out on the building rather than on us. We're, as a people, are going to be spared. Many thousands are going to suffer horribly, but as a people, we're going to be spared. That was something that breathed a sigh of relief. So specifically at Chatzos, that's when our mourning lessons, we saw the Beis HaMikdash getting fully consumed in flames. That's his answer to question number one. What about question number two? In that Kinnah 19, it says, Hashem, Hashem, you know why you're righteous? Because you destroyed the Beis HaMikdash twice. What are we saying? Yeah, because both times we as a people deserved to be eradicated. We were so chutzpahdik, we were so kafoi tov, we were such ingrates based on everything you've done for us. All of the warnings that our Nevi'im, our prophets gave us, we ignored. We were in such a terrible shape. We deserved kliya. We deserved to be totally annihilated. And twice, what did you do to us, Hashem? You took it out on the Beis HaMikdash and not on us. That's L'cha Hashem Atzdaka. You know why you're so righteous? B'shnei churbanos. It happened 2 times in our history that we deserve to be absolutely eradicated, and both times charvu b'betzenu. Instead of taking it out on us, you took it out on the Beis HaMikdash, va'anu kayamim, and you let us remain alive. Now it all makes sense. What's going on? It's not out of sync with the other verses in that Kinnah. It makes total sense. The first verse is always saying why God is full of justice and we're rotten. Same thing is happening here. When we're acknowledging that God destroyed the Beis HaMikdash twice, we're saying, and that was good. As crazy as that sounds, why was that good? Because by destroying the Beis HaMikdash, you took it out on sticks and stones, and not totally eradicating Klal Yisrael. And for that we say, L'cha Hashem Atzdaka. You are righteous. I thought this was absolutely beautiful. This changed something for me because it gave me a much better understanding of why it is on Chatzos, at Chatzos, we start to lessen our mourning when it's counterintuitive. We should have increased it. That's when the Beis HaMikdash was fully engulfed in flames. But no, that's when we felt a sigh of relief. And also this kinna that we're going to say, that we say every Tisha B'Av, and this Tisha B'Av should be the last time we ever have to say it. We acknowledge Hashem. Yes, that was tzedakah that you destroyed the Beis HaMikdash because you took it out on eitzim and avanim. You took it out on sticks and stones, not totally eradicating Bnei Yisrael. Now this all makes sense. I thought to me this really enlightened my Tisha B'Av. It gave it more meaning at these two different points. I hope that's something that can do the same for you as well. I'm going to, I want to wish everyone an easy fast. I hope that everybody